Good morning. So it's the beginning of a big week in social housing. The deadline for the submission of responses to the government's green paper is tomorrow, and I'm sure many of you are still working away, finalising your responses. I know we are here at Tpas Towers. But at this kind of pivotal time, I just thought it'd be useful to share and muse with you really on where we have come from to bring us to this position of hopefully seeing change finally for the tenant's voice and for tenant engagement. And that for me means looking back a little bit to see how we've got to where we are. So looking back to around 2014 and certainly 2015 with the rent cut, when we saw the sector last change so dramatically. I don't need to remind you, we had a narrative then that was all about building homes only. Funds were cut, and plenty of people in the sector telling me that involvement was over. But in reality, what was actually happening in 2014, 15, 16, up to the tragic events at Grenfell in 2017, which is where the Green Paper was born out of? Well, the good landlords engagement continued to be really good. They maintained their teams, and for some, they actually even increased their spend on involvement and engagement. They looked to stabilise their structures, and they strived to get even better. And many of you are our Tpas members, I know, who did that. We saw many good landlords continue with their accreditations around engagement. We saw landlords celebrating tenant success at awards. There was continued investment in tenant skills and training, investment in new but really meaningful new digital engagement mechanisms. And those landlords were ensuring that they were involving the tenants in the hard decisions that needed to be made as a result of the sector at that time. So tenants certainly still in those organisations still had a voice that was being listened to. And then we had the huge middle ground, and I recognise that many landlords had no choice but to cut involvement budgets. Really understandable. Many cut just some bits and struggled along trying to do a bit of involvement, trying to do the right thing, but often really without meaningful impact or real empowerment or devolved decision making. Many we saw look to digital as the answer. Data was the panacea of involvement, it seemed. That new mantra that we were all expected to buy into without question. It did feel, didn't it, that kind of human one-to-one interaction was just simply not the future for any of us anymore. And there was a propensity of the sector as well around all of this time to confuse, I think, self-serve, so that embracing of the simple technologies that all customers should be now reasonably expecting in transacting online, confusing that with it being the answer to all things engagement and involvement. Just say again, transacting and empowerment are not the same thing. And then we had at the bottom end, and I'm unashamedly saying the bottom end, we had the landlords that have always been, let's be honest, pretty rubbish at engagement, or had not bought into engaging with their tenants. And we saw some of them getting, in some cases, much worse. But joining them came the landlords from the middle ground, who again had to cut their involvement completely and had removed all their structures. If I look back to that time, if I remember that time, we had report after report, press article after press article, CEO after CEO telling me openly that involvement was dead. And so why could this happen? Why were so many tenants across this country left voiceless and ignored within their landlords? Well, I suppose in my mind, I think that was for two reasons. And the first reason was around government policy at that time. Government policy was allowing the situation. Government policy was actively encouraging a situation where social housing was marginalised and cut, and social housing tenants stigmatised. And sadly, I think, if we reflect back honestly, too many in the sector chose to follow that government policy, no matter what their own values or what their own organisation's mission and aims actually said. And secondly, I think why it was allowed to continue was because people were allowed not to care, because no one in government or positions of power were exercising their power to care. No regulator at that time was looking or checking or asking on behalf of tenants. So when I look back, that combination of a hostile government policy and a constrained regulator led to the silencing of the tenant voice across many parts of the sector. And the sector had swung to almost outright silence or opposition on tenant empowerment, or for many of us, a grudging and reluctant acceptance was starting that this was actually the new normality. So that's why I welcome the Green Paper. Yes, I'm sure I agree with all of you that we'd have all loved much, much more, particularly on stigma and particularly on housing supply. But the reality is this Green Paper gives the opportunity to swing the tenant engagement pendulum right back again. And we at Tpas will be grasping that opportunity. I absolutely know tenants across this country have woken up and have realised they do have the power now to grasp the opportunity, and that's absolutely just how it should be, and I give all my support to those tenants to do that. I'm also really confident that all the good landlords out there, all the Tpas members in particular, will be welcoming the opportunity that responding to the Green Paper gives us all today. But what I hope and what I lay on the challenge today is that all those landlords in the middle ground are stepping up to grasp the opportunity too. We must submit our response and we must push together as tenants and landlords to get the change we need. So, deadline day's approaching, folks. Really, can I urge you, don't miss out on getting your voice heard. Thank you.